All right, and welcome to your first recorded lecture for psychology. Again, this is Mr. Elling. So this is the only set of notes for the Intro to Psychology, which should be about a 3 to 4-ish day unit according to your Google Classroom. So this should take you about 15, 20 minutes. I don't imagine much longer. So with this online PowerPoint video, there's also an online note packet, which I'm featuring right here, which will be located in Google Classroom. Please have this up while the video is playing, or if you want to look at the regular PowerPoint too, feel free to do that. There's some links in here for you. All the information from the slides I'll be going over, I'll be elaborating a little bit more, so it's a little easier for you guys. As students, just know there's some fill in the blanks here. There's a table for you. You'll probably be required to pause the video once or twice, maybe 3-4 times as we go along. I encourage doing that so you guys can really take in the notes. Again, I'll be elaborating a little bit more as we go to kind of help connect all this material. So if you have any questions, you can email me at my email that's been posted everywhere. Just let me know if the sound quality is not great. I do have a microphone when I'm at home and I left it at school. I realized that once I started recording. So again, email me with any questions. Without further ado, we can get started here. All right, so again, make sure you're following along with that note packet. We're going to start with the Intro to Psychology. So the goal of today is so you guys to really get a hold of the early history of psych and the outline of the basic development of thought that happened throughout the early history of psychology. How did we get from the early thoughts of the brain to where we are now? And this is going to be like a guide through that time. So first, take some time, pause the video, answer the quick right at the top of your note packets. Why did you take psychology? What are you hoping to get out of this class? Maybe you're just taking it because it's elective. Maybe you heard it's fun, or maybe you're thinking about going into this. So please take time to answer this quick right, and when you're ready, go ahead and continue the video. All right, so then the next portion too, you'll probably have to pause on your note packet. There's 2 links, they're featured here as well. Click on these 2 links to answer the questions in your notes. I'll read them to you here and kind of clarify in case there's any questions. Which of the 10 reasons from the first article, so this one right here, reasons to take psych, do you believe is the most important reason to obtain a psychology degree? Just tell me why. Just skim through the article. Tell me your biggest takeaways. When you're looking for a career, what is the most important thing to you? Explain. Now I want you to think about what you want to do and what's really important to you, because psychology does weigh in a lot to career decisions and what fits best for us for a career. I like to talk. I like teaching because I get to talk and interact with people and help people out. Which career from the second website appeals to you the most and why? So this is a job outlook for psych majors. There'll be a list of occupations. Pick one and elaborate why that appeals to you. So again, take time to pause the video and answer these questions. The reflective questions, so give me 1 to 2 sentences, and I'll be checking your notes for attendance. So let me really see that you guys are participating and caring for this class. And again, take time to pause the video to get that done. All right, so basically, what is psychology? So it's considered a soft science. Now, the difference between a soft science and a hard science is the evidence behind what they talk about. A lot in chemistry and biology and physics, which is a hard science, can be measured mathematically. The plots can be graphed plot points can be put on a graph. You can see data, it's tangible, there's equations, so on and so forth. Now, psychology has some of that, but a lot of psychology is observation and question asking and surveying and getting to know people. And we don't have a lot of numbered data for that. So it's considered a soft science, meaning it's more about discussion and belief than it is about hard evidence. So psychology, for the sake of this class and most classes, is the scientific study of behavioral mental processes. So we're looking at how you act and why you think what you do. Psychologists find scientific data to prove their hypothesis, much like hard sciences. Psychology has come a long way. In its early roots, we couldn't really see. We didn't have EEGs. We couldn't see brain waves. We couldn't see literally the chemical flow in people's brains when they thought. Now we can. So now there's actually some hard evidence that's come along as psychology has evolved. If you go back into your old history, you learn in Western Civ about the telescopes and stuff. Psychology went through that phase too of developing to become more of a believable science. And it's a little later than chemistry and biology, but it's coming along. And psychology tends to be broad. There's social psychology, there's normal psychology, there's cognitive psychology, there's developmental psychology. There's a whole different bunch of psych specialties. It's a very broad course because there's a lot of different ways our brain works. It works differently when we interact and when we're alone. And so there's a lot of fields that you can go into to study human behavior. And that's what psychology is trying to help us do. So to get us started out, there's two types of research. The first one on the left is basic research. This is a science aimed at increasing what we know about the world. So we're trying to just increase our knowledge of the environment around us, how people's brains work around us. It's like doing an observation for school or a study. So an example is a Bardo prison experiment. So we'll look into this more in social psychology, but Zimbardo set up an experiment where he has a bunch of different college students, 12 of which sign up to be prison guards, 12 of which sign up to be prisoners. Maybe you've heard of this experiment before. And he's doing it just to see how roles have an effect on our behavior. He's doing it just to increase his knowledge. So again, he's not doing it to try to solve a problem. We're just seeing specifically how people act in certain situations. And on the right-hand side here, we have applied research, which is a scientific study that aims to solve practical problems. So that we're actually problem solving with what we discover. So for example, developmental psychology, there's Piaget's cognitive development theory. This aims and focuses on how we can better help kids reach developmental milestones, to see, if they need any help developing or if they're developing fast or slow. It's actually used in helping kids, so it's applied to people's lives. Okay. So the first stop along the way is Wilhelm Wundt. His goal was to understand human behavior. He worked in a lab in Germany, the University of Leipzig, and he had a bunch of little tests to try to figure out the way people were thinking. And he actually went a lot with reaction time. And he had this experiment where he had a little machine that would drop a ball. And at the same time it dropped a ball, it made a little beeping sound. And he would measure the reaction time between the drop of the ball and the person's reaction. So he was looking at literally watching our thoughts travel to our body and send a message that we need to go grab the ball. And so his first initial way of discovering about the mind is called introspection, which is you have people describe their own way of thinking, the stream of consciousness, their thoughts in a step-by-step process. So you are relying on the person to be honest with you when you're using introspection to gather data. He figured this would be the best way to dig inside of people's brains and just have them report what they feel. On the positive side, it was kind of the first thing like this at the time, and he gathered a lot of important data. On the negative side, think about surveys that you've taken before. You probably lie, and people do that too. And so sometimes the data you take in isn't necessarily super trustworthy. So a buddy of Wilhelm Wundt, actually a student to be exact, Edward Titchener, works with introspection, works with looking at our own feelings and talking about it, and comes up with the structuralism theory, which is saying the structure of conscious experience could be understood by analyzing basic elements of thoughts and sensations. So again, he wants to take the brain and break it down to certain structures, meaning that certain parts of the brain do certain jobs. And by inspecting these different structures of the brain, so it's essentially, for example, how our eyes take in information. By looking at how we take in visual information, you'll be able to understand more about the person. Same thing with hearing. By being able to understand what they're hearing, why they're hearing it, how they're hearing it, we can take in information about how their brain works that way. So an example of this really specific science was looking at how you'd examine a blade of grass. Now, a blade of grass in its structure, you break it down, there's texture, there's color, there's taste, there's smell. We're looking at senses. Again, 5 senses is the focus here. So if you break down a blade of grass visually, it's green. Some blades of grass might even look kind of like a really thin piece of paper. Its texture is different. It might feel bumpy, it might feel rough, it might feel smooth. Its smell could be different depending on the grass. So it's really breaking things down to different elements and inspecting those elements to understand. So the greatest contribution to psychology he has is that theories need to be tested. We need to observe other people. We need you observe what they're thinking, seeing, acting. So again, it really bases off of observation and self-reporting of the senses. So gestalt psychology is another building block as we're moving forward in history. It's our tendency to take individual pieces of information and putting together to get a meaningful whole. Meaning that, so if you break it down structural psychology, or structuralism, excuse me, and you look at maybe somebody's visual information processing. So what they are seeing, it's saying that if you look at, let's say, a car driving by, the information between what your eyes see and what your ears hear are different because they're different sensations. So by themselves, looking at a car is different with everything held constant, meaning there's nothing you can hear, so on and so forth, meaning you're just seeing the car. That piece of information is different than when you're hearing the car. Okay? So they're different pieces of information. But when you put it together and you see the car and you hear the car and you combine those senses, you get a different sensation or happening in the brain. So it's the whole is different from the rest of its parts. The whole is different from the rest of its parts. Okay? So things put together are different than when things are separate. An example of this is music and how it kind of builds on each other. So the band on the left here is Pearl Jam. I've always been a big fan. So the front man here is Eddie Vedder. He's a lead singer. Really the only name I know. But let's say Eddie Vedder goes out without the band and he just sings. Now it is the same song, but while he's singing without the band behind him, it's a different product. Okay, and then with the way music works in bands like this, each musician has a different job. All right, so if this guy plays the lead guitar and this guy plays the bass, this guy plays the drums, and this guy plays, let's say, a saxophone. The saxophone by itself is going to be different than when it's combined with the entirety of the song. Meaning, again, if you go back here, the whole is different from the rest of its parts. The saxophone by itself, you might not be able to tell what song it is. We're putting the guitar in with the vocals, with the drums, and with the bass, you get the song put together. So again, gestalt is our tendency to take individual pieces of information, put them together into a meaningful whole. By taking a specialist and putting what they do into the song, you get the creation of the song. I hope that does help to make sense. There are plenty of videos on gestalt psychology if you need to check one out. There's also an activity that should help you through it as well. So examples of how this works. This has to do with sensation perception, which will be our next unit. So what we see, for example, when you look at this, you probably see a rhombus shape. Well, that's because our eye tends to take meaningful individual pieces like this and put together into a meaningful whole. So you'll probably say that you see a shape here instead of 4 separate little like lines. For instance, here, the law of continuity, you probably won't say this is 15, 20 dots. You'll say that this is a line. You tend to group the information together. The law of similarity, you probably see 12 blue and 12 red. So you're grouping things together in your mind. It's a very simple, basic form of psychology. It just helps us understand how we see the world. We see 2 groups of 3 rather than 6 separate lines in the law of proximity because they're put next to each other. Okay? So we tend to group information into meaningful units. Next was functionalism. So this is brought to us by William James, who's the first American psychologist. He's authored the first psychology textbook. He has a college named after him at the University of Wisconsin. He's a really big figure in modern psychology. So instead of studying the structure of the mind, he wants to study the function of the mind. So he's looking at how our consciousness changes and helps us adapt to our environment. It's very much like Darwinism. So we believe that mental processes developed like Darwinism. We got rid of mental processes we didn't need anymore and adapted with new ones, and that's what passed on to our next generation. So an example is the stuff you see below you, brushing teeth, washing hands, showers. We didn't do this stuff right away. So we started thinking about health and hygiene and started noticing that when we did these things, we lived better lives. So we improved our stream of consciousness up here that it talks about. We improved the function, and we adapted with it and moved on with it. So now we do brush our teeth, wash our hands, and shower. Especially now we're doing a lot of hand washing. Should be washing your hands. Right, so here's a summary. You have a table in your notes. I'll have you break this down in that little table. It's just kind of a summary of what we talked about. So again, functionalism is, oops, notice there's an error here. This needs to be structuralism. This needs to be functionalism. Okay, so structuralism, we break it down into as many pieces as possible and really break it down, like looking at, for instance, their hearing rather than looking at the whole environment around them, looking at what they see, looking at what they feel. Functionalism is looking at the function of everything around the environment, the way the person thinks, trying to solve problems this way, right? So take this down in your note packet, you'll be able to like separate the two. Right, so psychology in the 20th century, we'll be doing a little activity with this in this unit, but just it's important to look at some of the subfields that rise out of structuralism, because again, structuralism focuses on specific things. Different psychologists had different ideas of what they could focus on. So psychoanalysis, for instance, for Sigmund Freud, he focused on our unconscious motives and drives, what controls our behavior, but we don't think about. Behaviorism looked at how our behavior affects us and how our environment affects us. Humanistic psychology is looking at how good we are as people. It's like looking at the soul. They call them the hippies of psych. Developmental psychology looks at how people develop from zero. From womb to tomb? That's how they say it. From womb to tombs, from 0 to 100. How do we develop? How do we change? How does that have an impact on our lives? So structuralism sets up a way for us to have more specific studies in psychology. So the 6 psychological perspectives, the main 6: cognitive, biological, sociocultural, behavioral, humanistic, and psychodynamic. So as psych develops, it's become more of a fine science. Cognitive psychology is, again, womb to tomb. How do we think? How do we process information? How do we learn? Biological is, how do genetics play in our behavior? So if you ever notice, your temperament tends to be the same from at least one parent. So how do the people we're related to have an impact on our lives? Sociocultural is probably my favorite branch of psychology. It looks at how the situation affects behavior. So how different groups affect your behavior. If you act differently with one friend group than another, why that's important to know, so on and so forth. Behavioral is how we learn from rewards and punishments. So if you touch a hot stove, you don't do it again. That's a punishment. You learn that way. Humanistic, why do we always try to be better people? How do we do that? How do we find the motivation? It's the center of a lot of therapies, humanistic psychology or positive psychology. Then psychodynamic, again, is looking at how our unconscious drives affect us. As something from the past, does it stay in our brain even though we don't think about it and affect our behavior? Using, again, in a lot of therapy. So modern psychology has 3 main areas of growth. Excuse me. So behavior genetics is looking at how much your genetics influences your behavior. So it's the nature-nurture argument. How much does nature affect us, who we're born, our parents? How much does nurture affect us, our friends, the way we interact with people? Again, that's kind of an ebb and flow in psychology, is nature and nurture, and we'll focus on that later here in this quarter. Evolutionary psychology. How have we changed as we've gone along? Again, if you think about functionalism, how we change as we go along, how our behavior and mental process changes, the world changes. And positive psychology. What's optimal for us humans to function? How should we think? Mindfulness, yoga, meditation. What makes us feel better? What makes us get through the day? Again, a lot of a huge focus in therapy for the last one. All right, so again, just a quick presentation there for your notes. Make sure you fill those in. Pause when you need to. Complete the activities for this unit. Make sure they're turned in on Thursday. So you're going to be the end of this unit. Again, check the attendance policies. I'll be doing this from here on out, whether it's going to be pre-recorded or might record lectures live in class, or just be on the lookout as things change in Google Classroom. All right, have a good night.